All right, so we touched on the Patriots probably needing to spend that first-round pick on a quarterback. Almost said quarterback. So we didn't see the top three guys throw. They didn't perform in drills, but we did get a little bit of glimpses of their personalities when they were at the podium. There were some reports on how they did in the interviews. And honestly, I know the problem says top three quarterbacks, but considering J.J. McCarthy's kind of slithering his way into the conversation, we can open it up to four. So what did you hear about some of these top guys? And from what you've heard in your own analysis, who do you think would likely be the best pick, regardless of what actually is going to happen at that number 3 spot?
Yeah, it's interesting just to hear about how these guys perform in the interview setting, because aside from the medicals that you acquire at the combine, the interviews are probably the most important thing these guys will do, certainly for quarterbacks that didn't work out at all, right? And, especially at that position, how you interact with others, how you communicate, how quickly you can demonstrate your football IQ, how you impact the energy in the room as soon as you walk into the room. These are all things that matter, and they matter to the Patriots. And while I would point out these are initial impressions only, and these meetings are about 15 minutes, they're on the books for 20, but a lot of times, especially at the quarterbacks, those guys are being held by other teams, and they might show up to your room a little bit later than they're supposed to, and then you're going around, you're shaking hands because you want to make a great impression on everybody, look them right in the eye. Like by the time you actually sit down and start to talking football, it's probably 15 minutes, right?
Right.
And so you can't learn everything there is to learn about these guys in that amount of time, but you can get a feel for them. And what I was told was the guy the Patriots were most impressed by was Drake Maye, just in terms of how he commanded the room, how he interviewed, his ability in terms of being able to explain football concepts, all of those things. He really, it sounded like, really impressed them. Now, that's not to say they weren't impressed by other guys. Jayden Daniels, much different personality, right? Much more laid back. San Bernardino, California, just a completely different sort of style there. But you can see on the tape, Drake may bring juice to the position in one manner. The way that Jayden Daniels brings it to the position is by making plays. I mean, 90 plays of 20 yards or more last season, that will get your teammates to want to play with you. And I think even having that sort of quiet confidence about him that Jayden Daniels does, I think, that's viewed as a real positive too. I think if you were just looking at the tape, Taylor, what the Patriots might tell you is that, Daniels is probably the second quarterback in this class and Maye is the third. But when you factor everything together, including age and upside and situation in college, and what you think you can coach and what might be able to be changed and what might not. There's so much that goes into it. It's not just about the tape, as much as we all know that that's probably the most important piece. There's much more that goes into it. It's probably at times more art than science. And so I think these guys are going to be viewed as pretty close. And my guess is now, knowing they're still going through the process and there's still plenty of time to get to know these guys even better and to have their opinions change. But my guess is right now, if the draft was tomorrow, they'd end up taking one of these guys at number 3 overall, whichever one falls to him.
Testing my skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps. Use the code CLNS for the first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Do you have any preferences?
I love Jayden Daniels' game. I just think the ability to take a broken play and take it 60 yards for a touchdown is so rare. And to watch him in the SEC just running away from SEC corners and safeties with the speed that he has and outrunning their angles. And also, oh, by the way, being able to win from the pocket and stare down the barrel at times and be willing to stand in and take a hit for a guy who's not a massive human being. And this is something that teams are going to have to weigh. Are we going to be able to keep this guy healthy? Because he loves to run. He runs a lot and he does take hits in the pocket. And he is about 200 pounds, it looks like. And he didn't weigh at the combine and you wonder why. And so we'll see. I'm sure, he'll do it at some point. He'll have to do it at his pro day is my guess. I say have to. I guess, who's forcing him? Maybe he'll never do it and he won't do it until he sets foot inside an NFL facility. But I just think his explosive playmaking ability and the special high-end talent that I think he has could be exactly what this staff needs. And that was something that was reiterated to me in Indy. Just people looking at it from afar, teams that are picking high in the draft, looking at Jayden Daniels and saying, boy, for a staff that is a new head coach, an offensive coordinator who hasn't called plays in a long time, a new general manager, to really get that thing off the ground and make sure that these guys start out in the right direction, Jayden Daniels' talent would be really enticing. And so we know they're probably not going to have the choice between these two. But if there was one player for them to come away with out of these two, I like them both. I really do. And I've liked them both for a while, but I think I would lean slightly toward the guy with the explosive running ability. How do you feel about it though?
I'm a Drake May guy, and a lot of it is the fact that he's just 21 years old. There's so much promise, and there's so many things on tape where I'm like, if you can extrapolate this, kind of purge the bad habits where a lot of it's his footwork. And what's Alex Van Pelt's whole thing? You don't usually see offense coordinators or quarterbacks coaches say, I want you to use this footwork. Don't use anything else. Usually that's something that quarterbacks figure out in the offseason with their own trainers. I think that, and it was a big reason that we saw him improve with Baker Mayfield. He did it with Andy Dalton. Like he said on record that this has worked for me. I've been able to teach it. It's not that hard to pick up. I can make this happen. So in that kind of system, you still have, there's the fact that he sometimes doesn't like to live to fight another down. He does have a tendency to drift in the pocket, which is scary. There are just fundamental things that do scare me. But again, with the age, that's where I'm saying, okay, well, we saw Jayden Daniels wasn't even in the conversation last year. People thought he was going to be a day 2, maybe day 3 pick. And now we're seeing, he's an older guy, but he took time, was in a system that allowed him to develop. And now look where he's at. He's getting talked about in the top 3, and that wasn't even on the radar last year. So I think that's why I'm more team Drake May. But at the same time, I understand the love for Jayden Daniels. But for him, the downsides are a little bit more prominent, and they're things he can't really fix. I think that's what scares me the most. Like you mentioned, his frame. He said, God bless me with this frame. And it's like, yeah, that's true, man. But I don't know if he blessed you with the right frame for the right position because you are quite small. And then there's the fact that, you and the good people at NBC Sports Boston mentioned it. The small hands. The fact that his arm isn't very good. In terms of drive throws, that's where he really kind of worries me because he's really good on those fades. Whether it's from the slot or outside, he hits those consistently. And that's where most of his big plays through the air, that's where they came from. But when you look at, okay, how is he going to throw, a 20-yard stop route when he's on the opposite hash? Is he going to be able to fit it into a window, or are the better cornerbacks in the league maybe going to be able to bait him, drive on those throws, or recover? Those are the things that scare me. So kind of touching on that, especially as we know, Foxboro, the weather is not good. We saw even Bailey Zappi when the weather got bad last year, going to one side of the field, he could not hit outside throws. He couldn't do it. I said, as soon as the quarter changed, they flipped fields. I was like, I guarantee he's going to try to throw a fade. It's going to work. I think the first throw of the second quarter, he hits a fade. So those are the things you do have to worry about, the inclement weather. He did, respond with the cap when there were comments that he didn't want to come to the Patriots, which makes sense. He doesn't, really seem like that type. But with his representatives, sometimes they do have preferences. So do those things scare you with any, legitimacy? Or do you think, he's such a dynamic talent, you can find ways to work around that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it was funny to see him respond, and I totally get him responding on Twitter yesterday. I think what I wrote about earlier this week got a little maybe misinterpreted to say that he doesn't want to be in New England.
Right.
That's not what I wrote. I wrote that there are, are people in his camp, supporters of his, people that are close to him that would prefer, if it was their preference, that he not end up in New England or in the Northeast is how I put it. But that we all know which team is going to be potentially drafting him that's in the Northeast. Yeah, of course it makes sense. And I listen, again, I understand some of the sensitivity to it, but I really didn't think it was a massive story. It's why it was sort of buried in a column among a lot of other stories that, kind of at the bottom of my little blurb on Jayden Daniels, because I don't think it's a big deal. The Patriots don't think it's a big deal. And the bottom line is he doesn't have a choice, which is
right.
kind of like a brutal thing about the draft, just big picture, when we're talking about, American civics and workers' rights, it's not ideal that you don't get to decide where you get to be in your first job out of college, but it is the way it is. It concerns me a little bit that the arm strength thing could be a thing here in New England, because I do think that Bill Belichick valued that at that position. Bill Parcells going back, like all of these sort of very well-respected evaluators from all different eras of the NFL, they understand you have to be able to play where your team plays. And your biggest games are going to be in December and January. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for the Buffalo Bills in the first round to draft Mac Jones, quite frankly. And the weather is slightly better in New England. And so maybe that was a factor in terms of why they felt as though Mac Jones had enough arm to play for the Patriots. But I think having Drake Maye, and I thought Eric Eager of Sumer Sports, formerly of Pro Football Focus, who joined us during Super Bowl week on Next Pats, was pretty eloquent on this. And you don't think of the analytics guys looking at somebody and saying, well, just give me the guy with the big arm. And that's not what he was saying, but it does matter when you play where the Patriots play. And so to your point, between the age, I mean, imagine 2 years from now, Drake Maye playing in an offense with, Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. What would that look like? Like you can let your imagination run wild, right? And like, I don't fault you or anybody else for looking at Drake Maye and saying, I'd rather have that guy. The speed and the game breaking sort of ability to me is so enticing, and Maye is enough of a projection that I think I'd go with what I've seen most recently.
That's fair. One thing with Maye, I do like to kind of give him his flowers for. He's not Jayden Daniels. No one in this class is Jayden Daniels. Few people in the league at quarterback are going to be able to touch what Jayden Daniels can do in terms of explosive running ability. I will say, I think Drake Maye is the second best runner in the class. When it comes to his instinct of knowing when he needs to scramble, I feel like his internal clock in that respect is very good. He's also he's a big guy. I know he mentioned during his presser that one of the ways he likes to fire his guys up is sometimes by like making guys miss, whether it's putting his shoulder down when he needs yards, whether it's hurdling guys. He acknowledged, I probably have to tone that back a little bit at the next level. But when you're 230 pounds, you can get away with that kind of stuff because you're going to be bigger than a lot of the guys that are trying to tackle you at the second level. Whereas like Jayden Daniels does the same thing. And it's like, oh no, buddy. Like you're not going to be able to make it to the end of the game when you're taking these hits. So I do like to point out that with Drake Maye, I think the entire playbook is open. I really do think you can do the QB run stuff, which we saw him do not a ton in college, but I believe in 2022, he did have a lot of success as a rusher, maybe not as much last year. So I feel like that's not really mentioned in terms of like, yes, Jayden Daniels is in a completely different realm, but Maye does give you that dual threat ability as well, even if you don't expect it from the big white guy who's, usually operating from the pocket. So, it's a lot of the strengths that Jayden has, I feel like they just have them in different ways where, it's the deep throws. Maye can do it, but he can also do it while fading backward, just kind of pop that thing up there and it's going like 50 yards in the air. So it is a very interesting conversation. I don't think any opinion is wrong necessarily yet. I see you got some.
Well, no, I'm with you. I totally see both sides of this. I don't see in the same way JJ McCarthy. We can get to that. I did just want to mention, you're just talking about his size and his frame. I think again, and I'm not telling you who I know they would prefer if they had the choice. But in terms of Elliott Wolf running this Patriots front office now, and you look at the Packer way at the quarterback position, especially at the most highly drafted guys, because it just kind of helps narrow our search a little bit. Elliott gets associated with Baker Mayfield a lot, rightfully so. He was the number 2 in Cleveland when they drafted Baker Mayfield, 6'1", 215 pounds out of Oklahoma to be their franchise quarterback in Cleveland. Baker is kind of an outlier when it comes to what Ron Wolf has drafted, what Ron Wolf's disciples have drafted, whether it's John Dorsey or Reggie McKenzie or Scott McLuhan. You look at these highly drafted guys, first and second round quarterbacks that these guys have drafted. Ted Thompson, of course, bigger bodies, thicker guys, Brian Braum in the second round, 6'3", 230 pounds for the Packers. Aaron Rodgers obviously is not a huge guy height wise, but 6'2", 223 coming out of Cal. Jordan Love, 6'4", 224. You could go to Reggie McKenzie in now Vegas, but at the time Oakland when he drafted Derek Carr. Again, not a huge guy in terms of his height, but 6'2", 214 pounds. Alex Smith, Scott McLuhan, a disciple of Ron Wolf's. Alex Smith taken 1 overall with 6'4", 217. So Jayden Daniels isn't going to hit that profile. He's actually the guy he's closest to of all the quarterbacks. So now I'm going outside the first and second round now. Of all the quarterbacks that Ron Wolf or his Packers disciples have taken, the guy he's probably closest to is Aaron Brooks, who was 6'3", 203 coming out of college and had himself an NFL career. But that might be exactly where Jayden Daniels is, when he measures in at his pro day, if and when that happens. But, maybe that's the kind of body type that you're talking about at the next level, as opposed to these other guys that Elliott Wolf's connections in the league over the course of time have taken in the first 2 rounds.
And we'll touch on Ben McAdoo a little bit later, but even him, like you think about the draft that everybody points to in the Mahomes draft where he had his rankings, Baker Mayfield was last, I believe. And then he had guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen, the really toolsy passers who at the time were getting a lot of criticism because they seemed really raw. And there was a lot of things that they had to work on, with McAdoo having some influence in the quarterback evaluation process. I know that they do highly value his insight in that department. I just really can't see him saying, yep, I got to put Jayden above Drake Maye, just looking at the physical tools. And one other thing I wanted to throw in the ring, I think Steven Ruiz mentioned one of the most common traits for the successful young quarterbacks these days, even some of the older guys, is that ability to kind of launch the ball while you're fading away. Because when we think about it, like how many times we've seen Patrick Mahomes take those really long drops where all these defenses using cover zero these days. So birds on a fence. They're coming. There's going to be a free rusher. You basically just have to try to get ground, back up, and then have the arm and the ability to manipulate your arm slot to be able to just launch that thing and take advantage of some of those, zero safety coverages and be able to pop it over the deep part of the field. Again, seeing Drake Maye do that, you don't see Jayden Daniels do it very much because, again, he just doesn't really have that kind of arm. So if we're talking about your franchise guy, this is the number 3 pick. If Jayden falls, again, I'll talk myself into it. I'm not that far away and saying like absolutely not. I think he's plenty talented. The age is a bit of a concern, but when you consider, how long quarterbacks are playing these days and the way they prepare their bodies and take care of themselves, I'm sure it'll work. But I just have a really hard time thinking that they're not going to jump at the chance to get Drake Maye if it's there.